family, freedom, and free enterprise on the Common Sense Club. Thankfully, we get to do that from the oil patch of North Dakota to the pines of northwest Minnesota and the plains in between of North and South Dakota, Minnesota, with God-fearing, freedom-loving, Constitution-worshiping folks from the heartland of America. And it's why we like folks like David Keene, the new president of the National Rifle Association. Not all that new anymore, but he is in the middle of a battle of all battles right now and joins us on the program for an update on what we know now are 23 executive orders and proposed legislation from the president and vice president of the United States. David, nice to have you back. Happy New Year.
It's great to be back.
Does this feel like
the
battle
of something to get up for in the morning?
Yeah, no kidding. Does this give you is this a battle unlike any battle the NRA has ever faced?
It certainly is. You know, when you have a president with an ideological agenda and a willingness, as he says, to spend his political capital to make it work, to achieve his goals, you're up against something. At a lower level, in a much more narrow battle, when we had this fight with Bill Clinton, you'll remember in the 1990s, and when he was attempting to get gun legislation that most gun owners opposed through, he won a so-called assault weapons ban in the House by a very narrow vote. Going into that vote, he was down by 15 or 20 votes. But once the Treasury was opened up, once a few ambassadors were promised, once a bridge or two was contracted for, things changed. So a president with the carrot and stick that he has can change votes that you wouldn't be able to change in a rational debate. So when you're up against a president who's willing to spend the taxpayers' money and his chits to accomplish something, you're in a real battle. And this president, as we've been saying for several years, has really wanted throughout his career to go after and gut the Second Amendment, and now he thinks he's got his chance to do it.
And if anybody doubts that, they ought to research his record as a legislator in Illinois to know where he's really at, although he's been silent on this. And then, second of all, dig deep into Fast and Furious, because that entire deal was about fanning a flame for more gun control, wasn't it?
That's exactly right. They can go back before Barack Obama ever ran for public office. He was on the board of the Joyce Foundation in Chicago, which was funding the effort to undermine the constitutional interpretation of the Second Amendment. They're the folks that floated the idea that there was no individual right, the idea that was finally rejected by the Supreme Court in the Heller case a couple of years ago. So he's been in this on the ground floor from the very beginning. Before this election, he told Sarah Brady, leader of one of the biggest anti-gun groups in the country, that he had to operate under the radar, but that he was going to deliver to her on his promises, whatever those might be. And now we can see what he's doing. I mean, this whole operation, not just the president's operation, but you see all these new private PACs and organizations that have sprung up are being funded and coordinated with money from Michael Bloomberg of New York. He was asked not too long ago how much money he was willing to spend in his anti-gun crusade, and he said, I don't know. I spent $600 million fighting tobacco, and I'm willing to spend as much as I need to on guns. So they've got money, they've got coordination, they've got a media that generally supports them, they've got a president that's committed, and they've got a majority in one house of the Congress. So I would think that this is going to be quite a battle.
They also have a crisis, and as Rahm Emanuel, the former chief of staff for this president, coincidentally also from Chicago, said, you never let a crisis go to waste.
Well, they certainly have. They were poised. They were poised to act. They knew there'd be something that they could use. And as soon as the Newtown tragedy took place, they were out there. All these groups were beginning to agitate. The mayor was on it. Things started to get organized, and they moved very quickly. And now the president and the rest of these groups are saying, let's push this through now while the crisis atmosphere continues to exist so that we can exploit it. That was the really disappointing thing about that press conference and statement. It wasn't about protecting kids. It was about using kids to advance an ideological agenda.
Here's my question. Bill Clinton politically learned a big lesson from that assault weapons ban. And a lot of Democrats said, we're not going there. Now, obviously, Obama comes in with a very different agenda, but politically pretty much tracked the same way until now. Why do they think politically they're going to fare any better than they did before?
I think that there are three reasons. First of all, they have resources that they've never had before. They have the coordination and the ability and the way to get it financed. I mean, think about putting $100 million or so into something like this. Secondly, they have turned the entire Obama political operation, along with the different so-called progressive groups that generated what he needed in his campaign, into the fight. Emails began going out right after the statement through the Obama campaign operation that it was time to gear up again. They've got their people identified. And thirdly, I think they believe that the Newtown tragedy gives them a catalytic event that they can use and leverage into getting the things that they wanted all these years.
Would you tell me, as a review of the legislation and your team has looked at it, the executive orders and the legislation itself, what are the top three biggest threats to the Second Amendment?
Running throughout that thing is an implicit desire to establish a national gun registry. We have maintained forever, if you will, that the government should not and ever be allowed to maintain a registry of who owns what firearms in this country, because that's the first step to confiscating them. And people laugh about that. But within the last couple of weeks, and we don't know what will be in the final versions, but Dianne Feinstein in California and Governor Cuomo in New York have both said that if they could get the records of who owns guns, they could have what they call forced buybacks. In other words, they could tell you, you have no choice. You have to sell that shotgun you own back to the government or to the government and get rid of it. Once they've got those records, all kinds of things are possible. And running throughout what the president was talking about was his desire to collect this data and keep this data. And that, I think, is probably the most serious underlying aspect of what he's up to. Secondly, when he talks about tightening up on background checks, we've been after the government for 20 years to include adjudicated violent mentally ill people in the NICS system. They haven't done that yet. But what we're concerned about is he has the Attorney General looking at other groups of people who ought to be denied the right to own firearms. We want to know what that's all about. Because as you may recall, under the Clinton administration, there was an attempt at one point that they've tried to renew here to have anyone who was a veteran who had had psychological counseling to deny them their gun rights for life. We had to go to Congress to get the rights back for 69,000 veterans. So that's a constant fear. Then you have, of course, the whole idea of banning a gun because of the way it looks, with the so-called assault weapon ban, which is banning a firearm on the basis of cosmetics. And once you start saying, I'm going to ban this gun, and once you get the Congress to accept the idea that it is the gun and not the shooter, and you remember, the president doesn't talk about criminals. He talks about gun violence, as if in Chicago, guns on their own kill people. That isn't what happens. In Chicago, as you probably know, there are 90 jurisdictions in this country under which federal prosecutions can be brought against people who use guns to commit felonies.
Right, and we've seen how those gun bans have worked. We're up against a hard break. Do you have time to stick around on the other side of the break, David?
Sure, I do.
Continuing on the Common Sense Club, standing for faith, family, freedom, and free enterprise. Weapons legislation showdown. That's the front page of the Fargo Forum today. Obama outlines proposals, signs 23 executive orders. We're chatting with David Keene, president of the National Rifle Association, on the program today. You were mentioning point number 3 of your biggest concern. Did you finish on the idea of banning a gun because of the way it looks that you wanted to?
Yeah, exactly right. That's what the assault weapons thing is. And my point is that once you accept the idea that it is the firearm rather than the criminal or the insane person using the firearm that's at fault, once you accept that, then you're on the slippery slope, because then why not get rid of the next gun and the gun after that? If you've got the desires of Barack Obama, who has in the past said he doesn't think any citizen has the right to privately own a firearm, you're on the road to a country that we really don't want.
What do you make of and of everything you just laid out? Your top three biggest concerns, are they all in the legislation? Are there anything in the executive orders? There's some talk that while we were all worried about what he would do by fiat, it wasn't as bad as was first predicted. What's your take on the difference between the legislation proposed and the executive orders?
Well, he's going to, even with the executive orders, some of it is meaningless. Some of it doesn't have any great impact. All of it, or most of it, is going to require money to accomplish, which means that as we analyze it and as members of Congress analyze it, they can go back and prevent it by denying him the funds to implement certain things that he may want to order. So while he's tried to defy the Congress, he's been smart enough to know that most of what he's going to need is going to have to go to Congress or is going to get bucked over to Congress anyway. And so he's not going to be able to get away with what he thought he might be able to get away with.
Let's talk a little bit about the political, back and forth and handicapping that's going on. Politico's written a story basically saying, most times Obama won't double down, won't go all in unless he knows it's going to pass. And they're saying that this may be the time, given the fact the Republicans still control the House, where he is, he's going to try like heck, but has a chance to lose politically, and maybe there's a way he wins by losing is the theory by Politico here. Is this all about the?
It's obviously he thinks that the political machine he's put together and the opportunity he has because of Newtown and the money he's got to run this operation on the outside through Michael Bloomberg is going to make a difference. But I think it would be unfair to say he's just looking at this from a political perspective. He's a true believer. He doesn't like the Second Amendment. He doesn't believe in the private ownership of firearms. He has, throughout his life, wanted to, quote, do something about it. And I think he's in his second term. He said beforehand there are a number of things that he couldn't do in his first term because it would jeopardize his reelection. He was very careful not to talk about these things while he was running for reelection because he knew that he was way out of step with the majority of the American people. Remember, Scott, that the United Nations in the summer of 2012 was ready to present what they call a small arms trade treaty, which would impact America's Second Amendment rights. They were ready to present that to the White House for signing. The State Department said, we want to delay that indefinitely. Well, I think what happened was somebody at the White House or in the campaign looked at it and said, oh, my gosh, if they send that over here, it's going to be on the president's desk during the campaign, and we don't want that. 2 hours after his victory speech in Chicago, a missive from the State Department went to the United Nations saying, get that treaty to us as soon as possible. And the UN is convening a special meeting in March to kick it back out so that it can go to him for signing. That was a clue. The clue was that those people, like us, who thought from the beginning that once he got a chance he was going to go after the Second Amendment, were right. We were right then, and what he's done since proves that we've been right. And it is going to be quite a battle to stop him. I think it can be done. I think you see gun owners and believers in the Second Amendment, believers in freedom around the country rallying as never before. But it is going to be quite a battle.
Senator Heidi Heitkamp, a lot of folks are watching, and you and I had a conversation with her about her and her candidacy during her campaign. Mm-hmm. One concern you had is that she'd blown off when she was a candidate for governor the NRA questionnaire, and then suddenly became a pro-Second Amendment and the questionnaire when it came time to run for Senate. She has, on one hand, been critical of the president's plan prior to being released, seeing a Washington Post report and calling it extreme and saying it had no chance of passing. She since has said that it doesn't go far enough because she wants something more comprehensive. Talk about Heidi Heitkamp and coming from a state like North Dakota, the role you see her playing in this.
Well, in many ways, she's symbolic of the people that are really up against it in this fight. I think on her own, representing the people of North Dakota, she'd be fine. And her initial reaction to the president's comments and the president's proposals, as Joe Biden was expressing them, was that they were extreme. That's not something that her constituents would want. There are a number of other senators in that same position, Democrats who are to use a word that the president likes to use, have common sense. But they are Democrats, and they are going to be under incredible pressure from the White House and from the president's supporters. She's already being subjected to attack ads back home. She was just elected a couple months ago. But the hard left, the so-called progressives, are out there trying to beat her into line. In many cases, Democrats in the House and in the Senate, who are all other things being equal, supporters of the Second Amendment, are going to be the real targets of this administration, because if they can make it a simple partisan fight in the Senate, they can win it. Right now, there are a number of Democrats, some that are newly elected, she being one, Senator Donnelly of Indiana being another, and some that have been there, like Tester of Montana and a few others, who, given their head, would be on our side on this, not on the other side. But they're the ones that are vulnerable because they're going to be under such heavy pressure from this administration. So
she'll get just enormous pressure from the White House to come along with them.
Absolutely. I mean, those are their first targets.
And she has said that her highest priority is and always will be protecting our children, securing our schools. I do not believe the president's proposal was as broadly inclusive or exhaustive as the severity of the subject requires. We must have a serious assessment of mental health services available to families and communities. Also do everything we can to identify potential perpetrators, prevent those individuals from ever taking the lives of innocent children. I believe that it is unnecessary to violate the Second Amendment to keep schools and children safe. And added that she and Joe Manchin wanted the creation of a national commission on mass violence. Your reaction to that quickly?
I think that's a good first step. I mean, we from the beginning have said, look, you've got a couple of problems with firearms, and none of them have to do with the firearms themselves. The first is the criminal use of firearms in places like Chicago results from A, the fact that you're not prosecuting gun crime, and B, from the fact that you are disarming the pool of victims, which results in violence. The second thing is that you have people who have slipped through a broken mental health system and are a threat to everybody around them.
We're going to have to leave it there. As always, David, appreciate your time. Sorry we're up against the break again. We'll let you go. David Keene, President of the National Rifle Association.